Alright guys, give me more recommendations. The Oprah interview is a great idea, so is the Netflix special, but I think they have copyright issues. I'll figure out a way to do that in the future, but for now, give me more recommendations so I have things to do in the meantime. I skipped a little bit of this interview because it was not really relevant to the channel, not necessarily interesting, so let's get to a good point.
I felt very different to what I felt before that. I felt slightly isolated, I felt slightly different. I didn't know what was going on, and maybe that was again the sort of the suppression of the trauma and the grief, but I had a proper laugh with my gang then, and you know, she was so close to my father as well in that relationship, and something that at the time I recognized but never really thought about in detail. But then 2 years of sitting there and writing this book, all of these memories come flooding back, and I start to be able to piece it all together like a puzzle. I went...
So just to comment on that, where he's talking about piecing all together like a puzzle, something that's important to recognize is memories are not perfectly accurate. They're actually pretty inaccurate. I'm not saying that he's wrong about this, but Harry got so into this, like, everything's trauma, my family was horrible, and he created this whole story in his head, and he's been taken by this psychological theory that's been repeatedly disproven. It's like you're getting repressed things out when normally you're just changing your perspective, often for the worse. So I think that shows a bit of his mentality.
Because there's an awful lot of material in there. You know, there's you losing your virginity. I think, you know, sensitive viewers.
We want privacy.
4 lines or something.
Right. Okay.
Oh, by the way, didn't he, like, the way he talked about losing his virginity, he made himself sound like a victim? Like, I don't know, he said he felt like a horse or some ridiculous nonsense. It's just like every last thing. You know, what was he, like 17, 18? I mean, I'm sorry, a 17, 8-year-old guy is not feeling like a victim for losing their virginity.
Rubbing it from my memory still, but it's okay.
We can talk about you losing your virginity.
No, that's good. That's not good. There's a fair amount of drugs.
Yeah.
Marijuana, magic mushrooms, cocaine.
Okay.
I mean, that's gonna surprise people.
But important to acknowledge.
Alright, did a lot of drugs.
Of course, I had been doing cocaine around this time, Harry admits in the book. In a country house, he says, adding that it did not make him in the slightest bit happy.
No
Feeling
kidding.
Different, he writes, was the goal. He was a deeply unhappy 17-year-old boy willing to try almost anything to alter the status quo. I mean, I think it's an example of the scale of honesty. You don't seem to hold anything back. You tell the story about cocaine through this tabloid editor. You said, came to you and said, I've got a picture of you taking cocaine.
I'm going to come to me, it came to someone else.
Yeah, okay, but we're going to release it unless you give us a tell-all interview, whatever it was they wanted, in line to the throne, or whatever you were, you taking a Class A drug.
To be fair, like, that is kind of nasty, but I feel like him and the cocaine, he blames it so much on the tabloids. He's like, oh, they say things and people say I did drugs. A lot of people have gone to jail for having cocaine, and he did take it. So I think his standard for the level of consequence that he deserves for his actions is like nothing, right? Like, it sounds to me there's no, like, hey, I put myself in a bad position by doing these drugs. I'm not saying, you know, it makes anyone who does drugs a bad person, but just that it's like, oh, it's their fault that people know I did drugs. It's like, well, you did do the drugs, you know?
It's not a matter of public interest. That's a question people will have. Do you accept that is a matter of public interest for the press?
I think what's a matter of public interest is the relationship between the institution with the tabloid media. That, to
So here's my proposition. Okay, it's not the public interest. Let's go check what the laws were at that time for cocaine possession, and he could have sat in jail for a couple of weeks if that is his argument, right? Do what everybody else would have done, the same consequence.
is more public interest than anything else.
Okay,
But
but
my life in itself has been put through, you know, a blender as such. So I think the lines have been blurred so much that public interest is more about the well-being of society, yet what interests the public, which is what the media have now turned it into, to the point of where they actually genuinely believe that. So I would be...
I see what he's saying, but as we've seen now, him and Meghan are like the worst offenders with drawing out people's business and drama into the public. So I think, again, it's all about they're fine with anything being out there so long as it's what they want exactly, which could be understandable, but when it's also we want to attack other people, it's not really understandable.
I wanted to sort of pick up in your childhood, because one of the things that came across very clearly to me is your deep love for your dad and your dad's deep love for you. I mean, he calls you my darling boy. You reference it pretty frequently. I loved him. I needed him.
That's really good. And coming up in a bit, he talks about how he had told his father not to get married, and that was like a big deal that his father didn't obey his wishes, which I believe would be an overstep. I might get to that in the next edition.
You know, you talk about being buoyed by his praise, right? Now, maybe this isn't surprising to people. Why should the fact that you loved your dad be surprising? But it's very, very clear.
Of course, he's my father. I always
well, not everyone loves their dad. I mean, you know, some people do, some people don't. But it's just very clear. I'm just pointing out that it's a very clear.
Also, I think it's a little dull, this interview.
You do love him.
Exactly. I love my father. I love my brother. I love my family. I always.
All right, so I'll just say on that to finish up. It seems like it's much more important for him to show in the public image that he loves and cares for his family, that he reaches out to them, rather than his actual actions, because it sounds like he overstates how much he's trying to connect with them in the public, which is the opposite of what you would do if you were really caring, or at least acting on that caring.
They have dinner once a year at like the Yale club, I don't know, in New York, and Prince Harry told him that he and